Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest is Samir Abid of You're Data Driven. Samir, welcome to the podcast. Hey, we're turning the tables here because last time I was on your podcast and now you're on mine, so it's my turn to get you.
Hey Ross, yeah, it's a bit weird to be this side of the microphone, but thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Well, this will be fun. I'm looking forward to talking. Obviously, we'll talk about some data because that's kind of a bit of your sweet spot, or a huge part of your sweet spot. But I want to kind of go out of motorsport here for a second because to me, one of the most fascinating things that I know about you is how you were involved with Nike's Breaking2 project, that whole thing around breaking the 2-hour barrier in the marathon. Can you tell listeners about that? Maybe many listeners don't even know about that project, what it was. And so tell them a little bit about that and how it went and your involvement in that, because I just think it's so cool.
Absolutely. So a very brief background. So I'm a motorsports and automotive engineer, and I've worked in dynamics and simulation, suspension and steering for 10 years for companies like Aston Martin, Jaguar, Land Rover, Multimatic, which is quite a famous company in the US, and I think you've driven one of my cars. So moving swiftly on.
Yeah.
And then about 10 years ago, we had another sort of economic disaster in the world, and so I took an opportunity to step out and do an MBA. And about 2008, 2009, and during that program, I had to do a dissertation, and I did that for a friend of mine who was working in Formula One, and we put together a business plan for an academy to develop racing drivers to win in Formula One, and interviewed the great and the good of motorsport, and it was really quite good, and she won an award and that kind of thing. During that period of time, my friend moved from motorsports into Olympic sports, and I came out of the MBA the other end, and there was still nothing really going on in automotive, and he asked me to help with some projects in Olympic sports, because the world of sport professionally was becoming more analytical, and they had to justify things in a more objective way. And that's not traditionally been a skill set that sports industries have had to have. In motorsports or a more technical sports, yes, but not in running or some of these less equipment-based sports. And things like Moneyball and these kind of concepts were getting into people's idea. Team Sky very famously have the marginal gains stuff. And so I've been working for the last 10 years in that industry. And the Team Sky guys were behind this Nike Breaking2 effort. So this was if we threw engineering at a running race, could we break this 2-hour marathon record? And they set up Breaking2 to run around as a sort of competition, actually, between a few runners at Monza, and they ran round, and Eliud Kipchoge came out on top, but he missed out by 26 seconds.
Yeah.
So everyone was like really happy because that was the quickest that anyone had run a marathon distance. But there was this kind of niggle that they hadn't done it. And so I'm working with all these guys, and it's a bit like motorsport industry. Everyone knows each other. You'll be working for one type of sport one day and another type of sport the other, but it's a similar kind of people behind the scenes. I've actually worked for over 40 different types of sports organizations in the last 10 years, and for me, my contribution is the data and analytics and the process by which they go about using numbers. In the wider world, they might call it business intelligence these days, but for my customers in sport, it's just helping them with spreadsheets and reports and things. Yeah. But those guys came to me and they said, "Look, Samir, we're having another go, and this time we're not funded by Nike, we're funded by Ineos." And Ineos is it's the biggest privately owned company in the UK. It's a petrochemical company owned by a guy called Jim Radcliffe. And Jim has a particular interest, or he's taken a very particular interest in the world of sport in the last few years. So he's bought the Team Sky cycling team. He's bought the Ben Ainsley America's Cup team. He put this project together, the Ineos 159 Challenge. He's also sponsoring the Mercedes Formula One team. So
that's all.
Yeah, I know. He's doing all right for himself.
Yeah.
And to be honest, we us geeks have benefited by being able to go back to that project and really do it. So, they asked me to get involved, and the first thing we had to do was find a location, because so this is quite an interesting thing that people may or may not be aware of. But if you think about the runner as like an engine or something, but with the physiology, it's all about energy management. And so if you think about it really simply, if you run round a corner versus running in a straight line, you're going to use ever so slightly more energy running around a corner than running in a straight line. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit like racing, right? So you want to open up the corner as much as possible so that you can go as quick as you can. We're thinking about it in terms of speed and grip, but they're talking about it in terms of energy management. Okay. The other thing is quite interesting is if you run uphill a meter, like in gradient or in altitude, they run up a meter, and then you run back down a meter, so you end up back in terms of height where you started. You have a net energy loss. Okay, so you compared to if you just run along the flat. Do you see what I mean? So you do gain something back on running down a hill, but you don't get it all back.
But you don't gain as much back as you use going up the hill.
Exactly.
It's kind of like way we use tires, right? Going around a corner, the more weight transfer, we're kind of losing some, right?
You're losing some, and you had the other day, you had Rob on the show, didn't you? And it was about introducing the car to the corner.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to give the tire less work to do. Okay. And it's the same here. We just want to give the runner less work to do. We want to get as much energy out of this guy as possible. And so we didn't want him to run uphill. And there are the project, technically didn't conform to marathon running rules, but essentially it was a proof of concept in the sense of if you threw engineering and an amazing runner at the problem, could it even be done? So we just went to town with it. So we found a location, and the location was based on geography and the time of year. So we wanted to do it in October time. And the geography had to be a certain distance away from his training camp in terms of minimizing the jet lag effect.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up in Europe, because I actually found some great spots in North America, to be honest. And we could have gone there, but it was too far away.
Yeah.
And, so sorry, guys, if you're listening.
Yeah.
But because what you really want is a straight road that ever so slightly goes downhill. Okay. And I found some in America, right? But anyway, we were like, okay, well, where in Europe can we go? Do we go back to a racetrack? Do we go to an automotive proving ground? What kind of surface are we looking for? And so we started to look around, and some of the criteria were interesting in the sense of we wanted a certain temperature and a certain humidity, because again, the hotter it gets ambient temperature, that's zapping your energy again. So it's a little bit like racing again, so if the track temperature goes up, what do you do with tires? You have to manage that. And it's the same kind of thing, but in this case, with his physiology. So we had a target of window of temperature and humidity. And also minimizing wind, the same as racing. You don't want it windy, it's drag. And even in a running race, you get drag. So we wanted to minimize all of that. And so we selected Vienna. And it's part of the Vienna Marathon course. It's a park, very beautiful town. If you ever get a chance to go to Vienna, it's absolutely lovely. And
Yeah.
It's about 4 kilometer long straight with 2 roundabouts at the end. And so basically my role was to go, okay, we found this spot. It's pretty good. It's pretty flat, but it's not completely flat. And we've got these 2 roundabouts. So how do we deal with them? And that was my job, was basically to work out the racing line, we would call it, for Kipchoge to run such that he minimized his turning and minimized his gradient change. And to do that, again, we went full engineering on it. So we LiDAR scanned the whole area, took a truck out from the UK, LiDAR scanned the whole, the roundabouts, all of the road topology, exactly like you would for a simulator, for either an engineering simulator or some of the simulation games, where they've scanned the tracks. Well, we did that. And then, and basically I sat there and then optimized exactly where he should run for his 2 hours. And and then I mean, some of the other things that the guys did with the aerodynamics and the weather and the paces was phenomenal as well. But my contribution was the line, and I guess they credited me with 8 seconds, which was lovely. So and he did it by, I think, 20. So guys, thanks. Just made it easier for him a little bit. But so that was my work there.
Wow, that's so cool. And it's cool because there's so many similarities between it and motorsport. And I'm thinking about, you talk about the energy use of going around a corner. I got to think that there is a point there where it's like, well, again, the more open the line, the straighter the line, the better. But at the same time, the shorter the distance. So you got to factor all that in there. So it's fascinating. That's why I wanted you to talk about that.
I had some pushback from the guys, because the first line I did, they were like, "This feels really weird," and because they wanted to be over in a different part of the road, because that's where they would normally go.
Yeah.
So then we had to show them that by doing that, they would have actually run up an additional meter, and over that period of time, that would have cost them half a second. I did full. Anyone who does data and stuff will laugh, right? But I did full delta T charts, showing all the different lines and how that would affect the speed, and how that would affect the energy, and how that would affect how far we went, and then tried to minimize it all. And anyone who's familiar with motorsports data will be like, "Oh yeah, I get that," but they were a little bit. But that's what they wanted. They want to demonstrate, right, if we did full engineering, what could we do? And that's what they got. So
I got to ask then, how does that impact your racing? Because the cool thing about you is you're not only an engineer, data geek, but you're a driver. You're a driver. You go out on weekends and you compete in the what is the series? I mean, they're basically Caterhams, or that's what they look like to me. Old Lotus Super 7s lookalikes. And what is that series in the UK?
Yeah, so that's the style of car. It's it's called a low cost 7, and it was designed by a guy called Ron Champion, who is a teacher at a school. And this was several years ago when you could buy Mark II Escorts for those old enough to know about that that kind of car. But you could buy them in a scrapyard for £250, and basically say he wrote a book, How to Build a Sports Car for £250. And several people. It took off around the world. There's people have low cost all over, and it's in the style of the 7 car. And then a few people went, okay, well, we've all built these. Why don't we give them a go and race them? And so in about 98, 99, they started racing them with the 750 Motor Club here in the UK, which is like it's a very ancient old motor club that, I know Ron Champion and not Ron Champion, Colin Chapman and people like that they've all had a go at competing with the club. And so the low cost championship is one of the most popular still. It's still oversubscribed. There's a race coming up in a few weeks, and there's people on the reserve list, and it's super, super competitive. And that's been going for a long time. But then a few of us went, that car's great, but maybe we could create another class with a bit more power and a bit better tires and ever so slightly quicker lap times and stuff. So we put an MX-5 engine in it and some stickier tires, and it's a lot quicker, and so it's a nice graduation really from the low cost grid to what we're calling the Mazda 7 Championship.
So how does the information that you learn from mapping out this break 2 hour mark in the marathon, how does that affect the way you drive? Like, do you look at the line you drive through a corner differently now than you did beforehand? Or is it just like, yeah, I kind of already knew that?
That's a great question, because one of the traps that I've fallen into is being an engineer when driving. And that slowed me down quite a lot, because at some point you just have to trust your instincts, don't you? You just have to trust your feelings that you know what to do, or you have to just go with it. And the problem with going too analytical is you kind of start overanalyzing things as you're driving around, and then and it's kind of like tight. You get tight, in the car, and you kind of so I've had all that. I've gone from like doing zero to going full bore into it to then finding this kind of middle ground. And you know what I tend to do with it now is that basically it's about answering some questions that I've got. So I use the data in a way that just helps me answer those questions. For example, was that line quicker than that one? Because you can go round the corner 2 or 3 different ways. Is that the right gear to be in? Is that braking point? Do I need to be braking later, or do I be braking a little bit earlier? And what effect will that have on both my lap time and my use of the grip? And so I've just tried to distill that back from going to like completely engineering to when you're engineering your own car as a driver, just to answer those basic questions of what gear is the best gear to be in, what line should I take, is it better to do a wider line, is it better to do not a wider line? And you can kind of work that stuff out with some certainty with this very simple data. And then you just go back out in your head and just go, right, okay, next time I get to that breaking point, I know this is what I'm aiming for. But then you still have to improvise, because every lap your car's different, isn't it? So you just have to but at least you know what's going to work. And that was the big thing for me in terms of transitioning from, when I started racing, I thought I was going to be quite good, and I qualified right at the back. And I was a bit like upset. My pride took a bit of a hit there, to be honest, and I was a bit like, oh, I thought this would be a bit easier, because I've done the corporate karting and everything, and I'd always done all right. But then you go racing with people who've been doing it for years and are actually quite good, and you're like, oh, let's see, I've got to be a bit better here. And so, you just have to sort of work out, but then you just have no idea how are these guys going that much quicker? Because you're driving your heart out, and you think, and what is they doing differently? Yeah. So the nice thing about the data is it kind of gives you that answer. It starts to show you, right, they're not superheroes. They're just doing these things better, and they're doing it more consistently than you are. And all you need to do is therefore X, Y, and Z, and keep it simple.
So the next time that you find yourself being too analytical in the car, I want you to think of this little trigger phrase that I use with a lot of drivers, and it's drive stupid. And it's the kind of a funny thing of saying just drive stupid, like turn your brain off, stop thinking, and just trust your gut to drive. And of course, you could be taking that the other way of, well, drive stupid, but I think that's a fascinating. It's a big part of the challenge that drivers have, a lot of drivers have, of thinking too much and then at some point kind of turning the brain off. And I would say the very best elite level, like I've worked with drivers who win the Indy 500 and NASCAR races and sports car races and all this stuff. And one of the things that I find common trait amongst them is they can be very analytical up to a certain point, and they can think things through and really work on the details. And then there's a moment where they go, poof, that goes away. I'm just going to drive the wheels off this thing and trust my gut. And I find that the drivers who don't quite get to that level, a lot of them get stuck in one way or the other. Some never think, and some think too much. And it's that ability to be able to turn it off when you need to and trust your gut that I think is really fascinating. And you being the data engineering geek, and geek, I mean in a good way, by the way. But I want you to figure out, I want you to come up with a sensor that plugs into the back of a driver's head, and we can trace that on the data and go, yeah, thinking too much. Oh, not thinking enough here. Wouldn't that be cool?
It would be quite cool. And I'll tell you what is also kind of interesting, because that's what you're talking about there. And I'm obviously doing it at not a pro level. And I did recently have a pro in my car, and for a promotional thing we did with the club, and it was really fascinating to see what he was able to do. But the how can I say, the bit around turning off the analytical bit is really important, because at the end of the day, there's a difference as well between going around and driving on your own around a lap, trying to piece together the optimum piece, everything as quick as you can, and then racing.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best line for the best speed is not going to be the best line when you're racing. And just having that almost level of improvisation to go with it, and just enjoying it and trusting it, is also quite good. I mean, and you can at least you get out at the end and go, I nailed it 3 times there, but at least I know where I could have improved. For me, that's valuable. If I get out and I go, I have no idea how those cars are quicker than me, that for me is I struggle with that. But at least I know that, okay, I know what they were doing, but I didn't have the skill to do it, or you know what I mean? I find that easier, to be honest, to deal with, because at least I can work on my skill.
Well, or the flip side of that is, wow, that was an amazing lap I just turned.
Yeah.
How did I do it? I don't know. Well, if you don't know, it's hard to go and replicate it, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I've been going through your Beginner's Guide to Motorsport Data Analysis online course, which is amazing course. And I got to kind of ask you about this. Like you say, Beginner's Guide. I got to tell you, like, I've been using data almost as long as data's been around. And I got to say, like, I learned a ton from it. And I can't say it, like it was like, oh, I need to do this little thing, but it helped me think about how I'm using data. And it made me rethink about it and question the way I've been doing it. And so the course is amazing. It's a fantastic program that you put together. Well, I guess the question, is it really for beginners?
Pardon?
Is it really for beginners?
It's really for beginners. Yeah, I think so. I put together this course that, the kind of thing that I would have liked before I got into it, and it doesn't just cover what I wanted was like an end-to-end process, not just this chart means this outcome. Because what I found myself, to be honest, is that as I learned more about the data, I became, at first I was confused because I didn't know what the lines meant, or how to interpret them, or what good looked like. And then as I learned that, I then became overwhelmed. Okay, so going back to your previous point about being too analytical, I was then overwhelmed, because you can go around every sort of inch of the track and go, right, I should have been slightly over here, and for the ideal thing, I should have changed gear like 5, all this stuff. You can get really, really, really detailed. And I was overwhelmed by all that. So I was like, oh. so what I wanted to do is try and work out like the total process, or present the total process, a bit like a washing line is how I describe it. So it's an end-to-end process where you want to go from one end to the other. The car comes in and you want it to go out quicker, right? You want it to go out and be quicker. And that means the driver has to have a better plan, or has to know what they're doing. And you kind of work backwards. So what is a good plan? So try to incorporate some of the learning from the work from Olympic coaches and how they approach stuff. Because obviously I've contributed to those guys in terms of their data and analytics, but through osmosis, I've watched them coaching the best people in the world. And you think, wow, that's a really great way of approaching that problem. And so I've tried to encapsulate that and focus on the simplicity. So we go from don't understand it to now understand something, I'm overwhelmed, to how do I distill that into something I can go and do. And that's really the ethos of the course. And so therefore it's a beginner's course because it explains that process. And there are elements of technical bits in there, but really the idea is it gives you that framework to then build from and that confidence to build from. Particularly, we talk about things like the GPS loggers, for example. I see a lot of people struggle with the fact they're trying to do some line analysis using the Google Maps on the thing, and it doesn't line up.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's not going to line up. But they don't know that, and they get upset, and they're thinking. But then, as soon as they see that, they think the whole thing's rubbish. It's like, well, no. So if you now understand how a logger works, then you would realise that the whole thing isn't rubbish. It's just the way in which the satellites operate, all that sort of stuff, is going to mean that sometimes those line analyses aren't that reliable. So instead, use video or something. So it just gives you all of that stuff that, as if I was sitting with you for your first weekend. This is how we'd do it, guys. So you now know all of the basics, and then you go off and you can do it yourself.
Well, a couple of quick questions off of that. Yeah. A couple of quick questions off that is, first of all, is the course designed for drivers or for engineers? Is that a trick question?
I've designed it for the self-coaching engineer. Self-coaching driver.
Okay.
I've designed it for the self-coaching driver.
Yeah.
A lot of people have signed up for it who are instructors, and I'm not an instructor, but they are instructing and they wanted to use data, and so they have used it to help with their own instructing. So that's a kind of a sort of a bonus for me that I didn't really, a market or an organization or a group of people that I didn't really consider too much, but in actual fact, they are getting a lot of value. But also this is for the person who really goes on, you take your own car to the track and you're doing your own thing. This is how you approach it. And then, or at least, there's another slightly different one, is if someone's doing this data analysis for you, right, you can at least ask the right questions.
Right.
It's a slightly different way of looking at it. But I talk about this is a business concept, so forgive me if it's a bit dull. But there's a concept of being an informed, informed consumer or informed purchaser. So I have an accountant for my business. I don't know how to do the books as well as he does, but I know enough about accounting to ask him all the right questions.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? And it's a bit the same. So if someone's doing the data for you and you don't know anything about it, then you just it can be a bit overwhelming. But at least you have some background in it and go, well, I've got my driver hat on today and you're telling me this. I really want to know X, Y, and Z. Then that's going to help that conversation with someone even who's doing it for you.
Well, two things here. One is, one of the things that I think of data as it provides an amazing insight into the driver's mind. Like you can look at the squiggly lines on the screen, and a lot of times you can go, that's what the driver is struggling with mentally. So I think that's a fascinating part of it and of data. But let me just put you on the spot here and say, okay, you've just finished a session. You have 10 minutes. What do you look at? What do you look at? And I know it's a little bit unfair question because it depends on the level you're at and what tools you have and all that kind of stuff. But if you've just got 10 minutes for a quick debrief looking at the data, where do you go to first?
Yeah, it does depend on who you've got. One of the things that I've tried to do is also help you self-assess your own driving.
Yeah.
Because if you're a novice, you'll have a different answer to if you're a pro. Because a pro is looking to optimize the finer tenths, and a novice is just looking to be safer and quicker. But to give you some answer to that, I think one of the nicest things to do is to overlay a few consistent traffic-free laps as possible on the speed trace, and you can you do the squint test basically, and you look for areas where the speed traces are not on top of each other, and that normally is an area where the driver is unsure. And if the driver is unsure or vague, that's an area to tackle. So if you can start to give the driver some more certainty around that part of the track, that generates lap time in its own right. I actually got my I don't know if I should say this or not, but when I was doing the slides for the course and everything, I actually got my kids who are like 8 and 10. I got them to like follow along with some of the lessons, and I got them to do the squint test, right, on the consistency thing. And I said, right, guys, where am I struggling? Where's the data struggling? And they instantly went, oh, there, and there. And I'm like, oh, cool. So it does work. And it really stands out. So I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Obviously, the consequence though is because you want to. It's like you've just discovered, like, okay, and the driver will go, yeah, well, I could have told you that. I could have told you I'm struggling in those corners. So what they want is a plan of what to do next about it. But at least it gives you that first alignment with the driver. I think we talked about this before. It's about making sure that the driver trusts you in your analysis. So if I can, without speaking to the driver, which is rare to be honest, but in theory, someone who knows what they're doing with the data, you can send them a log from a session, and they could do that comparison of the speed trace, and they can tell you straight away, right? Well, at least they know to ask, are you struggling in this corner? And sometimes the driver would be, how do you know that? How would you know that I was struggling in that corner? And it stands out as clear as day. So that's an easy kind of win, I would say. And then the next thing, for me, the big thing, everyone talks about breaking points. And I think when you are starting out, for sure, you're not using all of the brakes. I think that's pretty common. But for me, the priority or the most lap time comes from the exit of the corner. And so really, we want to be just focusing on how can I open that corner up so I can get on the power a little bit earlier. And I think I don't know why people don't look at that more often. They always look at braking point and trail braking in, and we wanted to carry as much speed in as possible, which is great. It is really good, but often there's more lap time to come on the exit. It's to the point where you might sacrifice a tenth going in, but gain half a second on the way out.
Yeah.
And you're more consistent at doing that as well. And I was like, okay, there are two things that I would really focus on.
So the consistency thing of overlaying a few laps and seeing where the driver's struggling, again, that kind of gives you that insight into the driver. And, I would suggest that a lot of times that driver doesn't have a clear mental picture of what they should be doing in that corner. And that's probably where the consistency or lack of consistency is coming from. But kind of going to the, is it braking points? Is it getting back to throttle? You touched on this already. Part of it depends on where the driver's at, right? I mean, if a driver's a novice, sorry, but there's a good chunk of them that don't even have data in the car because they're still looking at just finding the right line around the track. And as you point out, the GPS line part of it, I don't know. It's something that I don't trust an awful lot. And then, the next thing has got to be exit speed, throttle, getting back to power, getting out of the corners. But then when you're looking for that, if you're looking with a pro elite level driver and you're looking for those last few hundredths or maybe a tenth, a lot of it does come from the end of braking, brake release part, entering the corner and using that to get the car in a position to then get out of the corner better. I always look at the brakes as the brakes, part of the reason we use the brakes is as a tool to help us get back to throttle sooner. So it's kind of when you get to that level, you're looking for fine tuning little stuff. So, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? But it kind of gives you that insight into what's going on with the driver inside the head there. That's the part that I love. Yeah. So
I think you're right. And video is a great tool as well, particularly when you're starting out and you can hear, to be honest.
Yeah.
If you can hear whether the car is or what the car's doing, and you can see how the driver's operating it and such like. So that's a great place to start. It's not going to tell you whether or not you're gaining or losing time in a corner that easily. I think you can actually work it out by counting frames and things like that. But it, that's one of the lessons with all of this is a means to an end. So I want to get. So if you think about this whole end-to-end thing, car coming in, car going back out with a plan, right? You just want to get to that better plan than you had before as quickly and easily as possible. And so the tools that you use around you are going to help you to do that. So you could even tire pressures and tire temperatures. That's going to give you an indication of what the car is doing. You've got your video. That's going to give you an indication of what the car is doing. The data that I'm just talking about driver data here in terms of accelerations and speed and this kind of thing. That's going to give you this indication of what the car is doing. But the idea is really to get to that. Use these things as a means to an end, so you can get the driver more certain and more confident, so that when they go back out, they can go quicker. And I worry that people get distracted because it is quite geeky, like you say. You get sucked into it all, and it's quite fun on its own, and you can end up, with the quickest car on the laptop. But I don't want the quickest car on the laptop. I want the quickest car on the actual track,
Yeah. And so one of the things that I hear a lot of data gurus saying is the speed channel is the money channel. That's, kind of your first thing. You look at the speed trace, and there's a side of me that goes, okay, yeah, it tells me how much money I've got, but it doesn't tell me how I got that money. And that's where, to your point of the data should help you put a plan together for the next session, to say, well, go faster there. Because that's what the data, the speed trace says, go faster there. And yet, how do I go faster there? And that's where you got to look a little deeper. And again, your course helps with that a ton, but the process part of it, right?
Absolutely. But it's a case of going from like what happens. Yeah. And you go from different, so you don't need to do any of this, right? So I start the course off with that kind of thing of like guys, is data even worth it?
Good point.
Because it's an elephant in the room question, and you're just thinking, well, let's not just assume that it's a good thing to do. Let's kind of have a chat about it. And I'm pretty open-minded to it. I mean, obviously I'm sold on it, but at the same time, I appreciate other people are not. So you kind of go, well, come on, what is it not good at? Because it is pain, and it does take a while, and you're like, is it even worth it? And, I've got my lap time, and I can get that free from the track or my lap timer. That's all that matters, isn't it? And it's kind of, well, yeah, it is all that matters, but wouldn't it be interesting to know what happened between the lap times? And then if you break it up into sectors, what happened between those sectors? And I'll tell you something, this is, I don't wish to plug all of my own stuff here, but this is quite a good example, right? So I had Scott Mansell from Driver61 in my car for a promotional event, and I drove the car, amateur, and he drove my car on the same track, same conditions, and he was a second and a bit quicker than me. And so that was a bit demoralizing. And then I split the track into 3 sectors, and he was quicker in each sector. So that also got me down a bit. And if I'd left it at that, I'd have just been going, well, this guy's just a superhero, and I don't know what, I just have to hustle the car more, or I just have to be more heroic to get more pace out of this car, right? But then I looked at the data in more detail, and we actually I looked at the delta T channel, and in actual fact, by 2/3 of the way through the lap, I was a quarter of a second up on him. I was quicker than him. Yeah. So obviously I had a small hurrah moment of going, this is, I'm quite quicker than a professional racing driver in my own car. So that was kind of cool. And then I was able to dissect it and go, okay, well, hang on. What happened? Because he then was a lot quicker than you. So something's gone wrong for me or good right for him. And what was it that worked? And so that, for me, having that granularity of understanding was something that I found really beneficial, but it just isn't for everyone. They're just like, I just go out there, Ross and I'm just going to drive the wheels off this thing, and that'll be enough for me, and that's fine. But if you want to know a bit more, then this is a nice way to do it. It's quite accessible, really, once you get into it.
Well, and I was going to ask you about that because I knew that you had Scott Mansell in your car, and great opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity that a lot of drivers would love to have is, if I could get somebody else who's really, really good to drive my car, and then I could use the data, and basically I could then go out and copy what he's doing, that's going to take me there. So, I mean, there's kind of two obvious questions there. One is, but what do I do if I don't have that? Or the flip side of that is, what's the best way? And that's, maybe to kind of start to wrap up this conversation, because, we could spend a while on this, but, if I've got tomorrow, I'm going to the track, I'm in my car, it's a car that I've been driving on track for 3 years now, and I got Lewis Hamilton showing up, and I'm going to put Lewis in the car. How do I best take advantage of that? What should I do to best take advantage of that, rather than just kind of sit back and marvel at how good he is?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, because you'd expect him to go quicker than you, right? But that's not going to help you. You want to learn what he's doing differently, so that you can have a go yourself. And also to sort of doubly out, to address your other point, it was like, well, what if I don't have a professional in my car? What do I do then? And there's one of the channels, the acceleration channels, is called Combine G or G Sum, or I honestly, Ross, one of the issues with data is that the same piece of information is given different names by different manufacturers, and it really does my head in. But anyway, if it's not complicated enough, we'll just call it differently to what everyone else has called it. Just to confuse people even more, honestly. Anyway, so moving on, but what this channel does is it combines, if you think about your car going in a straight line, you've got a certain amount of tire grip until you lock up, and then you haven't got so much grip. And you've got a certain amount of tire grip when you're accelerating until you get wheel spin, and then you haven't got so much. Okay, so that's going forwards or backwards. When you go side to side, you've got the same, so you can keep turning until you run out of grip, either oversteer, understeer, or neutral. But at some point, you will lose grip going left, and then it's same going right. And then you can also combine those together. You can have, I can turn and I can brake a little bit. Yeah, so when you're familiar with trail braking and that sort of stuff, and we put together the friction circle, and that's Combine G and this kind of thing. But you can plot that, and so at the end of the day, Lewis Hamilton or Scott Mansell, they can't drive outside of that friction circle of your car. Okay, they might do it better than you, but they can't produce grip, because the friction circle is, you can't measure grip, right? But you can measure the effective grip. Or another way, the effect of when you don't have grip, if that makes sense. And so this channel is kind of saying, well, this is how much grip you've got. And the way you look at that is to say, well, am I using all the grip that I have available? And so the idea is you sit on the edge of the friction circle, which in a chart that goes in a sort of a horizontal fashion, is you've got hills and mountains and peaks. So basically, I say you want more pointy, rounded mountains than flat, bumpy hills. It sounds rubbish on the show. If I could show you in a picture, it's much easier. But basically, it is quite easy. But all you'd do is you'd look at Lewis or Scott, and you look at you, and you go, look, he's just making a better hill out of that corner and than me. And you can see, is it on the entry or is it on the exit? Is it mid corner? You can see exactly where that is. And then you have to take a step back and you go, okay, well, why is that? So are they taking a different line? Are they coming off the brakes early? But then you have certainty and you go, okay, he's just doing that differently. So Scott, for example, was half a meter to the left on a right-hand corner. He was half a meter over on one of the corners, and that opened the corner up, and he gained half a second on me within about I don't know how many yards it is, but within a short period of time. Okay. And it was him just placing the car slightly more to the left.
And that's something you should have known from the mapping you did from the marathon stuff.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, he was ever so slightly on the curb, be honest with you. So, the semantics of it. But yeah, it is something. It is something I know, but it's I don't know. One of the problems with data is that unless you're using something that can give you some live feedback, you can't go back in time and run that session again. And this is something I address with the is data even worth it question, because you can't go back in that qualifying session and run it again, can you? So what's the point of looking at it 20/20 vision and going, if I'd just been over half a metre over here on the left, I'd have gone quicker, because I can't go back in time and change that qualifying session. But the point being is that, to link back to your work about mental programming, there'll be a similar type of corner at a different type of track, or a different track, that you can then learn from the experience of what you did before at this track in that qualifying session. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's worth understanding where you could have improved, so that when you go to even another track, you can then tackle that similar kind of corner in the way in which you would have been quicker at the last track. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to start to wrap up this podcast, unfortunately, but you touched on a couple of things there. And one of them was, you said, Hamilton or Mansell are not going to be able to go beyond the limit. And I agree with you entirely in theory, but part of what makes them so good is they actually do go over and then bring it back a little bit. And they have that ability to sense going beyond and bringing it back. And they have that trust and self-confidence in themselves that if I do go slightly over, it's okay. I'm going to bring it back. Because, you watch Hamilton drive and he makes mistakes, but he's really good at making those mistakes to the point where he brings it back, and they're become tiny, tiny little mistakes. So,
when you see Lewis drive and he loses the car, what impresses me most about Lewis is how he drives those mistakes in a way that minimises the time lost, the consequence of that mistake.
Yeah,
I think that can't be underestimated, and because he knows he can do that, it gives him more confidence to drive closer to the edge more often, and it's absolutely amazing to see. He's not like cat reacting or anything. He's literally driving. Say it's an oversteer. He's driving the oversteer as if it was like turning into a corner or something. Yeah, he's totally on top of it. He's ahead of the whole car. He's kind of like, yeah, cool, okay, I can do that, and it's really impressive.
Yeah. Well, that's another topic for another day. And you and I are going to have that conversation around, again, how to use data to help us get closer to that ability on a more consistent basis. So, hey, Samir, before you go, give us your speed secrets, the one piece of advice that you would give drivers to help them become even better.
Yeah, the one thing for me for the most drivers that I see at club level, it's once you're up to speed, it's focusing on those corner exits rather than being more heroic in the braking zone. That's where the people are going to get the most lap time, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm just making a note of that. Tell listeners how to follow you. I think they should go and take your beginner's guide to motorsport data analysis online course. How's that? I got that all up in one thing there. Only because it's sitting right here in front of me, because I'm not that smart. But the other thing, your website, and you can tell us the URL for that, but your website has got an amazing number of resources on there for everything from articles and videos about tire pressures and how to set up a sim racing rig to all sorts of things, like really cool stuff. So share that with us, and social media links. How do people follow you?
Yeah, so thanks. It's yourdatadriven.com and at yourdatadriven on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and such like. The site, we've talked about data. The site really is a kind of race engineering resource for the clubman, an educational resource, but also practical tools, articles. I mean, a newsletter that goes out once a week with, just new articles and advice for people. So obviously I've got the course at the moment, but there's all sorts of stuff on there about how to set up your racing car, how to master data analysis, but also how to drive faster. So it's everything that the clubman would like to have, and the concept really is learning from the pros. So I've got the podcast as well, so I get people like you on, and I ask you, okay, come on, you're an IndyCar driver, what can we learn from you? But I've got engineers on there, I've got people who are raising sponsorship money, I've got all sorts of different people who can help you think about your racing in a different way and hopefully get some more takeaways. And that's really the purpose of the site, to share and help everyone improve and get more out of their racing. That's
cool. I think that's why you and I, when we got introduced, kind of totally connected and was like, oh, we need to spend more time talking and doing things. So I think we're both on the same wavelength there. So, hey, Samir, thanks for being on the podcast. Really, really appreciate it, and appreciate you sharing this information. I know people listening to this got a lot out of what you had to share. And again, I know you've got more on your website and things like that. So, hey, we'll be in touch and we'll talk some more, and we'll move on to that whole trust and going over the limit and bringing it back and all that kind of stuff on another podcast another time. But as always, keep learning and having fun out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
If you're listening to Ross, reading one of his books, or watching a webinar, chances are you're a pretty fast driver, or even really fast. But you probably want more. You want to lower your lap times, or maybe even a little bit faster. But how? Ross's Drive Faster webinar has some answers. It will help you understand what to do, then give you a plan for doing it. Ross shares many of his proven strategies for making you a faster driver. This is an information-packed webinar that you can view, review, and rewind anytime, again and again. When a driver thinks he or she has set a personal best lap time, Ross usually says, remember, there's always more. Well, that's true with this 3-hour webinar that was recorded over 2 sessions. There's no better time than right now to learn skills and concepts and put together your plan for taking your driving to the next level. Go to speedsecrets.com/webinars to download the Drive Faster session and keep learning.